The Colosseum stood like a monument to human suffering, its stone walls echoing with the ghosts of 10,000 battles. But among all the stories buried in its blood-soaked sand, none were more haunting than those of the gladiators who survived their injuries, only to discover that survival itself could be the cruelest fate of all. In the year 72 AD, as Rome basked in its golden age of conquest and excess, the arena served as the empire's beating heart. Citizens from every corner of the known world gathered to witness spectacles of death and glory. They came for blood, for drama, for the intoxicating thrill of watching men dance on the edge of mortality. What they didn't see were the broken warriors who lingered in the shadows long after the crowds had gone home. Marcus Aurelius Calvus was 23 when he first stepped onto the sand. Born a slave in the Germanic territories, he had been captured during one of Rome's endless border wars. His size and strength caught the eye of Alanista, a trainer of gladiators, who saw potential profit in the young barbarian's frame. For 5 years, Marcus transformed from a frightened captive into one of Rome's most celebrated warriors. The crowds adored him. Women threw flowers at his feet. Men wagered fortunes on his victories. He had survived 47 matches, each one a testament to his skill with the gladius and his uncanny ability to read his opponent's movements. In the arena, he was more than a slave. He was a god of war, painted in sweat and blood. But the arena was a jealous mistress, and she always collected her due. It happened during the festival of Saturnalia, when Rome's social order turned upside down, and even slaves could pretend to be free. The match was supposed to be special. Marcus against 3 condemned criminals, a display of superior skill against desperate savagery. The crowd expected an easy victory, a warm-up before the main events. The first 2 fell quickly, their untrained movements no match for Marcus's years of experience. But the third man was different, scarred and wiry, with the dead eyes of someone who had nothing left to lose. He moved with an animal's unpredictability. When Marcus raised his shield to block a wild swing, the criminal dove low, driving a concealed blade deep into the gladiator's lower back. The pain was immediate and absolute. Marcus felt something fundamental snap inside him, a sensation like lightning racing down his spine before everything below his waist simply stopped. He collapsed onto the sand, his legs refusing to respond to his desperate commands. The crowd's roar turned to confused murmurs as their champion lay motionless, his opponent standing over him in shock. The emperor's box loomed above, and all eyes turned to Caesar's thumb. Death would have been merciful. Death would have been honorable. But the thumb pointed upward. The champion would live. As the arena slaves rushed to carry Marcus away, he didn't yet understand that mercy could be crueler than execution. The ludus, the gladiator school, had a separate wing for the broken ones. Here, in damp cells that smelled of herbs and human waste, those who could no longer fight waited to discover what purpose remained for warriors who couldn't stand. Some died from their wounds, despite the ministrations of Greek physicians. Others took their own lives rather than face a future without glory. Marcus spent weeks staring at the ceiling, willing his legs to move. He could see them, could touch them, but they might as well have belonged to someone else. The physician, a Greek named Demetrius who had seen too many broken gladiators, explained with clinical detachment that the blade had severed something vital in his spine. He would never walk again. The other gladiators avoided him at first. In their world, weakness was contagious, and a crippled fighter was a reminder of what awaited them all. But Marcus refused to simply fade away. Using his still powerful arms, he learned to drag himself across the floor. He fashioned a wheeled platform from discarded wood and leather, creating a crude chariot that allowed him to move through the ludus. The lanista, a practical man named Quintus, faced a dilemma. Marcus was valuable property, too expensive to simply discard, but useless in the arena. It was another broken gladiator, a former retirus named Cassius, who had lost his leg to infection, who suggested a solution. The ludus needed trainers, men who understood the subtle dance of combat. Who better than those who had mastered it themselves? Marcus threw himself into this new role with the same intensity he had once brought to fighting. He couldn't demonstrate the footwork, but his understanding of timing, distance, and psychology remained intact. Young gladiators learned to fear his sharp tongue as much as they had once feared his sword. He developed new training methods, using his wheeled platform to circle fighters, striking at their legs with a wooden staff when their guard dropped. But the nights were the hardest. In the darkness of his cell, Marcus dreamed of running, of the feeling of sand between his toes, of the simple joy of standing upright. He woke to the reality of dragging himself to the chamber pot, of depending on slaves who were themselves enslaved. The irony wasn't lost on him. He who had once commanded the attention of thousands now struggled with the most basic human dignities. Other broken gladiators found different paths. Titus, a former Murmillo whose spine had been crushed by a falling Retiarius, became a weapons master, his skilled hands maintaining and crafting the tools of death. Gaius, paralyzed from the chest down after a chariot accident in the arena, discovered an unexpected talent for strategy, becoming an advisor to ambitious lanistae seeking an edge in the games. But many simply disappeared. Rome had no use for broken tools, and gladiators who could no longer entertain were often sold to work in mines or factories where their remaining years would be short and brutal. Some were lucky enough to win their freedom before their injuries, using their saved winnings to open taverns or shops. They became the old men who sat in corners, telling stories of glory days to anyone who would buy them wine. Marcus witnessed all of this from his wheeled platform. He saw young gladiators arrive full of fear and false bravado, watched them transform into killers, and eventually saw them carried out on shields or, if they were unlucky, on stretchers to join him in the wing of the broken. One young fighter, a Thracian named Alexios, particularly caught his attention. The boy had talent, but lacked discipline, relying too heavily on his natural speed. Marcus rode him mercilessly in training, striking at his ankles, forcing him to maintain his guard even when exhausted. When Alexios complained, Marcus would simply point to his useless legs and ask if the boy preferred that alternative. Years passed. Marcus's hair, once black as midnight, grew streaked with gray. His powerful torso remained strong, but his legs withered despite the exercises Demetrius prescribed. He became a fixture in the ludus, as much a part of it as the sand and stone. New gladiators learned to respect the crippled trainer who could spot a weakness in their form from across the yard. The empire changed around them. Emperors rose and fell. The games grew more elaborate, more desperate in their attempts to satisfy Rome's insatiable appetite for novelty. Naval battles were staged in flooded arenas. Exotic animals from the furthest reaches of the empire were brought to die for entertainment. And still, the gladiators fought, and still some survived to join Marcus in the shadows. One day, Alexios returned from a match with a familiar look in his eyes. He had won, but his opponent's dying strike had damaged something in his hip. He could walk, but barely, each step a symphony of pain. The arena was closed to him now. Marcus found him that night, sitting in the cell that had once been his, staring at the walls. "I trained you well," Marcus said, rolling his platform beside the younger man. "You lasted 8 years. That's more than most. What do I do now?" Alexios asked, his voice hollow. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "You survive," he finally said. "You adapt. You find a new purpose, or you die. Those are the only choices we've ever had." Alexios became his assistant, and together they trained a new generation of fighters. The cycle continued, endless as the games themselves. Some gladiators achieved glory and freedom. Some died quickly, their names forgotten before their blood dried on the sand. And some joined the ranks of the broken, learning that there were fates worse than death, but also discovering strengths they never knew they possessed. Marcus lived to see the completion of the Colosseum, Vespasian's grand amphitheater that made all previous arenas look like children's toys. He was even brought to the inaugural games, wheeled onto the sand he had once dominated to receive the crowd's recognition. They cheered for him, these Romans who had watched him fall, though he wondered if they truly remembered, or if he was simply another spectacle, the crippled gladiator brought out for their amusement. In his final years, Marcus dictated his memoirs to a Greek scribe, one of the few complete accounts of gladiatorial life to survive the ages. He spoke not of glory or honor, but of the simple realities of existence in the shadow of death. He told of men who faced their ends with dignity and those who begged for mercy. He spoke of the brotherhood among fighters who might kill each other tomorrow, and of the strange peace that came with accepting one's fate. But mostly, he spoke of the forgotten ones, the gladiators who survived their injuries only to discover that Rome had no place for broken heroes. He told their stories because no one else would. The weapons masters with missing arms, the trainers who directed from chairs, the former champions who begged in the streets because their crippled bodies could no longer earn their keep. Marcus died in his sleep at the age of 52, ancient by gladiator standards. They found him in his cell, his powerful arms finally at rest, his useless legs covered by a worn blanket. The ludus gave him a gladiator's funeral, burning his body with the weapons he had once wielded. Alexios spoke the eulogy, standing despite the pain, honoring the man who had taught him that survival took many forms. The games continued for centuries more, feeding Rome's hunger for blood and spectacle. Thousands of gladiators walked onto the sand, and many never walked off. But in the shadows of every arena, in the forgotten corners of every ludus, there were always those who survived to face a different kind of battle. The daily struggle of living when the crowd no longer cared, when glory was a memory, and when every dawn brought the challenge of finding meaning in a life forever changed. Their stories were rarely told, these gladiators who never walked again. History preferred its heroes dead or triumphant, not struggling with chamber pots and phantom pains. But they existed, these broken warriors, proof that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in how we face death, but in how we choose to live when death might have been kinder. In the ruins of the Colosseum today, tourists walk where Marcus once dragged himself on his wheeled platform. They take pictures where Alexios learned to train others despite his constant pain. They stand where thousands discovered that survival could be its own kind of victory, even when it came at the cost of everything they had once been. The untold fate of gladiators who never walked again was neither glorious nor romantic. It was simply human, a testament to the adaptability of the spirit and the cruel arithmetic of entertainment that measured worth in mobility and strength. They were the forgotten casualties of Rome's greatest spectacle, warriors who discovered that the hardest battles were fought not on the sand of the arena, but in the quiet moments when the crowd's roar faded to memory, and all that remained was the choice to continue or surrender. Their legacy lives not in marble statues or epic poems, but in the simple truth that they endured. In a world that valued only strength and spectacle, they found ways to matter when they could no longer provide either. They became teachers, craftsmen, strategists, and storytellers. They proved that a warrior's worth wasn't measured only in victories, but in the courage to forge a new path when the old one was forever closed. The sand of the arena drank deeply of blood and sweat, but it was in the shadows where the true measure of these men was taken, not in how they fought, but in how they lived when fighting was no longer possible. Not in their moments of glory, but in their years of quiet determination. They were gladiators who never walked again, but who never stopped moving forward, one painful inch at a time, proving that the human spirit could survive, even when the body could not.